Hi there Patreon viewers. So I've just finished filming a video which hopefully you will have seen by the time you see my Patreon video, talking about this cutlass which has got a 1796 heavy cavalry, shortened heavy cavalry blade mounted on an 1845 hilt. And I just wanted to kind of say off the record, there are a few other really interesting things about this which that give me information about the origin of this blade, and there are things I don't know as well, which I'm generally quite good, I think, at admitting on the public channel when I don't know something. But sometimes for the focus of a video where I'm just presenting information, if there's something I'm not sure about, I'll often just avoid that point altogether. But this does have some markings on it. So I hoped when I got this blade, I actually cleaned off with Wireball on the spine, because very often the maker's name would be on the spine of the blade. But in this case, it looks like there may have been a name there, but it has been erased essentially by cleaning. Not by my cleaning, by cleaning that went prior. But there is another really nice point. I'm going to see if I can show this on camera. Hopefully you'll be able to see it. Let's wait for the camera. There you go, you can. So just there is an arrow. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, that is the so-called broad arrow mark of the at this period, what's called the Board of Ordnance, BO. Not that kind of BO, but the letters BO, Board of Ordnance. And the Board of Ordnance, quite simply, was something that went all the way back to Henry VIII's time and was essentially the government department, or kind of, not quite armoury, although it did in a way lead on to the royal armouries, but it was essentially the government department that kind of tracked the ownership and distribution of weaponry, gunpowder, cannonballs, everything like that. And the reason it's the broad arrow mark is, of course, one of the main things that the Board of Ordnance used to manufacture, keep and distribute in the early days was arrows. So like those bundles of arrows and longbows that were found on the Mary Rose, Henry VIII's flagship from 1545, or that sank in 1545, they would have been distributed by the then, the Board of Ordnance as it was then. In 1855, I think it was, 54, 55, I think it was 55, the Board of Ordnance actually was replaced, or rather renamed, rebranded, by the War Department. And the War Department did exactly the same job, but it was massively reorganised, reshuffled and kind of streamlined. And the reason was the Crimean War. Essentially, the Crimean War was quite an embarrassing fiasco for Britain. I think it's a very interesting war, and it did have highlights. The charge of the Heavy Brigade, which always obviously gets less attention than the charge of the Light Brigade. If you don't know about it, there's a good Wikipedia page on the charge of the Heavy Brigade. Look it up, read about it. It's pretty cool engagement, actually, between British and Russian cavalry. But one of those rare cases where cavalry charged uphill slowly and still succeeded. But that arrow, anyway, coming back to the sword, that arrow is the sign of the Board of Ordnance, or the War Department later on. So we know that this blade was an issued blade, therefore not an officer's blade. It was a trooper's sword, essentially. And then there is one other clue as to its origin, and that is the letter T round this side on the ricasso. Now, I don't necessarily know if some of my British sword expert mates are on my Patreon, so if you are, speak up. But I seem to recall that the letter T, and this is something that I could have spoken about in my public video, but which I didn't, the letter T is associated with one particular maker of the Napoleonic era. And I can't remember who it is. I'm going to have to do some Googling to try and work it out. But as you might imagine, Googling the letter T and sword doesn't turn up results very easily, unfortunately. So it's something like Tate or Tatcham or something like that. I seem to remember that there is a maker of Napoleonic British government contract weapons, so sabres and bayonets and things like this, that put the letter T on their products. And that must relate to the maker of this blade. So this blade almost certainly saw action. It's kind of, it's a good reminder in a way that even with a 19th century weapon like this, let's say it dates to 1845, it's a Victorian cutlass. But that blade could have been around in the year 1800, could have been around, 45 years earlier. That blade could have been used in any number of military campaigns, in the Peninsular War, could have been used in India, could have been used at the Battle of Waterloo, you know, or any of the other great famous battles in which the British Army fought in the Napoleonic Wars. I think it's really fascinating that a army rather than navy, this is navy, the army blade of the cavalry, the heavy cavalry as well, which are less numerous than the light cavalry, so there were never that many heavy cavalry. I find it fascinating that a heavy cavalry Napoleonic blade ended up on a Victorian naval cutlass hilt, and the end result is a really lovely sword actually, and I'm very happy to have got this. I initially bought this as something to sell. In the photographs I could tell it was very, very rusty, but actually it's in better condition than I thought it would be. And when I got it, I was reminded of how much I do love 19th century cutlasses. They're just really nice objects, reassuringly hefty, should we say. Anyway, there we go, some extra thoughts. I hope that's somewhat interesting, and I'll see you really soon again for another Patreon video. Yet again, I'll just mention again, I haven't forgotten the previous videos where I asked for suggestions, and also the Lord of the Rings video. It's all there. I've just been super busy. Again, I wouldn't say this on the public channel, but the reason I've been so busy actually is my daughter, because it's what we call summer holidays, summer vacation, I guess you call it in America, at the moment. So I'm sharing the kind of children duties with my wife Lucy. So I've been basically busy being a daddy. But also, what do you think about my new filming environment? So this is my garage, and those are my garage doors, but obviously here is where I do a lot of my workshop work. I'll probably be doing some restoration videos in here at some point, but that was actually supposed to be a temporary background for filming, and I was going to get some kind of drop-down graphics or something to make it look a bit more professional. But it seems that some people really like the big barn door look, so maybe I'll just keep it as some wooden doors. At least that way I can hang things off it fairly easily. Anyway, yeah, thanks for watching, and see you again soon for another video. Bye, folks.